She warned her father so many times, but he never believed her, until the day he came home early and heard his daughter scream, "Please, Mom, I can't swim." The sound of water splashing against the pool's edge broke the silence of the orange-hued afternoon. For Clara, sitting in her wheelchair under the shade of a sprawling oak tree, the noise was almost a lullaby, a steady rhythm that soothed the turmoil in her chest. The scent of chlorine mingled with the sweet fragrance of the lemon grove in the garden, creating an atmosphere that should have been peaceful, but had for months felt charged with an invisible tension. She was sliding her fingers across her tablet screen, organizing notes for a school project, when the shadow of her stepmother, Beatrice, fell over the device, long and slender. The air seemed to grow colder. Beatrice wore an immaculate white linen dress and a smile that never reached her eyes. It was a smile for guests, for photos, for the country club. For Clara, it was just a mask. "Darling, you're too close to the edge. It's dangerous," Beatrice said, her voice like rehearsed velvet. She positioned herself behind the chair, her perfectly manicured hands landing on the rubber grips. A shiver ran down Clara's spine. Her fingers, which had been navigating the virtual keyboard with ease, froze over a single icon, a large red button her father Henry had installed on the system. A silent alert, sent directly to his phone and to Jonas, the groundskeeper, a precaution, he had said, for any emergency. Clara had never used it until now. The wheelchair slid forward too fast, the sun hit the girl's eyes, and for an instant everything became glare and panic. Her heart hammered, an uncontrolled drum against her ribs. She tried to turn the wheels, but Beatrice's hands were firm. Then the voice she dreaded most whispered something harsh and sibilant, a phrase the wind carried away before it could be fully understood, but its venom lingered, and she pushed. In the millisecond before impact, Clara's thumb, with the precision of someone who had practiced a secret move for weeks, pressed the red icon. The screen made no sound, just blinked once, confirming the signal had been sent. Clara's world turned into a blur of blue and white. The shock of the cold water stole her breath, and the weight of her body seemed to vanish for an instant before gravity pulled her toward the bottom. The sound of the outside world became a muffled, distant hum. Her eyes burned, but she kept them open, watching air bubbles rise, carrying her silent scream with them. The floral dress she wore danced around her like sorrowful seaweed. She didn't know how to swim. Cold, absolute panic began to consume her mind. Outside, Beatrice was already rehearsing her performance. "Clara, oh my God, she slipped!" she cried, her voice tinged with a desperation that would sound convincing to anyone who didn't know her eyes. But what she hadn't accounted for was the coincidence fate had arranged. A regional internet outage had knocked out the gated community's connections that afternoon, forcing the last-minute cancellation of Henry's video conference. He was just minutes from home, his heart already tight with an inexplicable premonition, when the alert vibrated in his pocket. At the same time, Jonas, the groundskeeper, who was organizing tools in the back shed, felt his phone buzz and ran. His face creased with worry. He was the first to arrive, diving into the water without hesitation. Seconds later, Henry's car screeched its tires on the gravel driveway. He found a chaotic scene, a soaked Jonas holding his trembling daughter in his arms. Beatrice, her face bathed in artificial tears, pointing to the wet edge, and the tablet, protected by its waterproof case, lying beside the chair, still recording ambient sound. Henry looked at the real panic in his daughter's eyes and the staged anguish on his wife's face. His heart, an organ trained to analyze risk in multi-million-dollar deals and the volatile stock market, desperately wanted to believe in innocence. But his eyes couldn't forget the mute terror emanating from Clara. In the days that followed, the Harrison estate, once a haven of luxury and tranquility, became a stage for whispers and heavy silences. The sunlight that streamed through the immense glass windows seemed colder, and the hallways, once filled with the soft whir of Clara's wheelchair, now echoed with an oppressive emptiness. Henry felt the change in atmosphere the way an investor feels a market turn, a chill down the spine, a sign that his family's emotional capital was at risk. He, a man who had built a fortune analyzing data and mitigating risk on Wall Street, felt powerless within his own walls. The fear in Clara's eyes was a data point he couldn't process, an anomaly that defied all logic. Clara, for her part, retreated into her own world. The garden, her favorite place, became forbidden territory. The smell of chlorine rising from the pool now made her nauseous, and the once comforting scent of the lemon trees seemed sour. She spent hours in her room, the tablet her only companion, but not for studying. She navigated virtual worlds, places where she could walk, run, and, above all, where Beatrice's shadow did not exist. Trust, once broken, was like a shattered crystal vase, impossible to glue back together without the cracks remaining visible. Beatrice, sensing Henry's subtle but firm withdrawal and her stepdaughter's seclusion, began a charm offensive. A huge bouquet of sunflowers, Clara's favorite, appeared in the living room, so vibrant and yellow it seemed to scream in the silence. The next night, she prepared a creamy corn chowder, the special recipe Clara's grandmother used to make for Thanksgiving. The aroma filled the house, an attempt to evoke happy memories, to rebuild the bridge she had dynamited. But when Clara tasted the first spoonful, she felt no flavor at all. Distrust was a poison that had killed her palate. She pushed the plate away, and Beatrice's smile faltered for an imperceptible moment. Henry watched it all from a distance, his heart divided. He did what he always did when faced with a business crisis. He sought out experts. He hired a renowned occupational therapist recommended by Clara's school to help his daughter process the trauma. At the same time, he contacted his IT team, a group of brilliant young people who managed the security for his digital assets, including his crypto wallets. The order was clear: set up an immediate and redundant cloud backup of all security cameras and, more importantly, try to recover any fragment of data from the day of the incident. He needed facts, hard evidence that could calm the storm in his mind. Beatrice's reaction to the therapist's hiring was one of exaggerated support. "What a wonderful idea, my love. Anything for the well-being of our girl," she said, adjusting the collar of Henry's shirt, but her eyes shone with a cold, calculating light. She knew time was running out and that the environment was slipping from her control. It was then, on a rainy night, while Henry was frustratedly analyzing an IT report about the upload failure caused by the outage, that she deployed her first smokescreen. She walked into his office holding a few printed sheets of paper. "Darling, I didn't want to worry you with this, but I found these messages. It seems they're from some of the staff." Her voice was a pained whisper. The messages, supposedly exchanged between the cook and a former gardener, insinuated that Clara had a history of making things up for attention, of causing small accidents to feel cared for. Henry read the words, and the floor seemed to open up beneath him. Doubt, a poisonous seed, had just been planted in his heart. Henry spent a sleepless night in his office. The printed pages spread across the mahogany desk, next to investment fund performance charts that, at that moment, seemed to belong to another life. He, a man who had built a multi-million-dollar fortune buying and selling assets on the New York and Tokyo markets, who understood the flow of dollars and euros like a poet understands verse, felt emotionally illiterate. The words in the messages were venomous and, worse, plausible. A child starved for attention could, indeed, fantasize. Doubt gnawed at him, a compounding interest that grew with each passing hour, threatening to bankrupt his most precious asset, his trust in his daughter. He looked at the safe where he kept important documents and a small reserve of gold, thinking how true wealth was fragile, immeasurable. and now under threat within his own home. The next morning, the occupational therapist arrived. Her name was Helena, a woman with a serene gaze and a gentle voice who seemed to carry an aura of calm with her. The session was scheduled for the music room, a neutral space far from the pool. Henry watched from a distance, pretending to work on his laptop. Helena didn't ask direct questions about the incident. Instead, she spread a large sheet of paper on the floor and gave Clara a box of colored pencils. "Let's draw the safest place you can imagine," she said. Clara hesitated, then picked up the blue pencil and began to draw the walls of her room. When Helena asked who would be in this safe place, Clara drew her father and Jonas, the groundskeeper. The figure of Beatrice did not appear. At one point, Beatrice entered the room carrying a glass of juice. "Just came to see how my little artist is doing," she said, with her radiant smile. Clara flinched instantly, the blue pencil stopping mid-stroke. Her entire body went rigid, an involuntary reflex that lasted only a second, but did not escape Helena's trained eye. When the session was over and Clara was back in her room, Helena asked to speak with Henry alone. "Mr. Harrison," she began gently, "what I saw in Clara today is a very clear pattern. It's not a tantrum, it's not manipulation, it's what we call a learned fear response." She explained how the body reacts to a persistent threat, creating automatic defense mechanisms. Her rigidity when your wife entered, the way she averted her gaze. These are signs that she associates Beatrice's presence with a feeling of danger. Helena's words fell on Henry like cold water. It was a technical analysis, but it carried a truth he felt in his gut. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "For now, no confrontation," the therapist advised. "Just observe. Let your wife believe she controls the narrative. Give her room to let her guard down. The truth often reveals itself in small gestures, not in grand arguments." That advice was the opposite of everything Henry practiced in his business. He was a man of action, of direct confrontations, of assertive negotiations that generated profit and increased his net worth. To feign, to observe, to wait. It was a strategy that would cost him dearly, emotionally, but he looked out the window, saw the empty swing set in the garden, and knew it was the only investment that mattered. That night, he made his decision. He would be the most convincing actor Beatrice had ever known, and his first victory already came at a price. The next morning, at the breakfast table, Henry smiled at Beatrice as she poured him a cup of coffee, an open, complicit smile. Across the table, Clara saw the gesture, and the light in her eyes went out. Betrayal was a bitter taste that not even chocolate milk could wash away. Sunday arrived with a strong sun, typical for that time of year. It was the day of the traditional barbecue at the country club, a mandatory social event for the families that made up the local elite. The sound of a live country band mixed with laughter and the smell of grilling meat. Children ran across the lawn while their parents discussed the latest stock market results or the price of Bitcoin, a topic that had become fashionable even among the most conservative. Henry felt as if he were walking on thin ice. Every exchanged smile, every handshake was part of his new, uncomfortable performance. Beatrice was in her element. She moved between tables with the grace of a natural hostess, her linen dress now a sky blue, accepting compliments and dispensing charm. To the world, she was the devoted wife of a billionaire, the caring stepmother of a lovely girl. No one saw the shadow she cast. Henry guided Clara's chair to a more secluded table, near a bed of hydrangeas. He wanted to spare her the commotion, but he was also looking for a specific face. Mrs. Amelia, an elderly neighbor, the widow of a diplomat who had lived next door for over 20 years. She had a special affection for Clara ever since she'd heard her play the piano at a community party. Amelia approached with a plate of fruit salad, her small, sharp eyes peering from behind gold-rimmed glasses. "How is our little musician?" she asked, her voice soft. After a few minutes of pleasant conversation, while Beatrice was distracted in another group, Amelia leaned in toward Henry. "My dear," she said in a confidential tone, "I don't mean to pry, but I've seen a great many seasons. Last week, from my window, I saw Beatrice with the girl outside. The sun was very strong, and she was insisting on certain physical therapy activities. She seemed impatient, pushing the pace." She paused. No one else was around. "I found it odd." Henry felt a knot form in his throat. He just nodded his thanks, not showing the storm the information had stirred within him. It was another piece of the puzzle, small but significant. The testimony of Amelia, a respected woman with no stake in his family's dynamics, carried more weight than 1,000 anonymous messages. Later, while Beatrice reveled in the success of her social performance, Henry slipped away to a quieter area of the club and called the head of his IT team. "Any news on the audio?" he asked, his voice low. The answer was a mix of frustration and hope. "Mr. Harrison, the outage corrupted most of the cloud upload. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with 90% of the pieces missing." Henry felt his heart sink. "But," the technician continued, "we managed to identify something on the security system's local drives. Not video. Audio fragments, tiny little bits, picked up by the external garden microphone. The quality is terrible because of the wind, but we might be able to clean it up and piece something together." A thread of hope, as thin as a spider's web, but it was all he had. It was a high-risk investment, betting on those fragments, but it was the only one he was willing to make. He knew that to protect his greatest inheritance, his daughter, he would have to fight with the weapons technology offered him, turning corrupted data into an asset. The second week dragged on with the slowness of a storm cloud building on the horizon. Henry maintained his facade of a confident husband, but the internal strain was beginning to take its toll. His nights were short, filled with nightmares and the obsessive analysis of his company's cash flow, a desperate attempt to find order in numbers, while his personal life was pure chaos. He felt his emotional equity draining away, like dividends that were never paid. Beatrice, on the other hand, seemed to flourish in the apparent calm. Sensing that Henry's suspicion had dissipated, she grew bolder, believing her control over the narrative was total. It was then that she executed her next major move, a calculated play to paint herself as the personification of generosity, while simultaneously resolving a personal issue that was pressuring her. One evening, during dinner, she announced with a voice thick with emotion, "Darling, I've been thinking, that jewelry I inherited from my grandmother, it's just sitting in the safe, collecting dust." She looked at Clara, a theatrical glint in her eye. "I've decided to sell it. I want to donate the entire amount to the accessibility campaign at Clara's school, so that other children can have better ramps and equipment." Henry almost choked on his water. The proposal was so noble, so altruistic, it seemed irrefutable. It was a masterstroke. He congratulated her, the taste of the lie bitter in his mouth, as he watched Clara's confused expression, unsure whether to believe this sudden philanthropic outburst. The next day, Beatrice asked Jonas, the groundskeeper who also served as the family's driver, to take her to a renowned jeweler downtown. Jonas, a man of few words but unwavering loyalty to Henry and especially to Clara, found Beatrice's haste strange. She seemed anxious, almost feverish. While waiting in the car, he observed the storefront and discreetly noted the name and time on his phone. Later, sensing the information might be relevant, he passed it on to Henry. "Boss, I don't mean to meddle, but Mrs. Beatrice seemed in a real hurry to turn that gold into cash." The information was the trigger Henry needed. He contacted his personal accountant, a discreet man who managed all his assets and liabilities. The task was simple: cross-reference the date of the visit to the jeweler with recent financial movements in all household accounts. including those managed by Beatrice. The discovery was like a punch to the gut. There was no mention of a donation, no account opened in the school's name, no contact with the accessibility campaign. What there was, however, was a series of small diversions, drip transfers, almost imperceptible, to an unknown account recently opened under a shell company. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a pattern, a slow, steady bleed on the family's capital. The story about the jewelry was just a smokescreen to justify a future influx of cash she intended to siphon off. Another piece of the puzzle snapped into place, and the picture forming was darker than Henry could ever have imagined. Beatrice wasn't just cruel, she was methodical, and her greed seemed to have no limits. The revelation of the financial diversions hit Henry like a ton of bricks. He spent the night in his office, not looking at stock charts, but at bank statements that painted a portrait of methodical, small-scale betrayal. It was proof of intent, of Beatrice's duplicity, but it still wasn't proof of what happened at the pool. He knew that confronting her with only the financial data would make her play the victim, spin a new lie, perhaps claiming she was saving money for a surprise. He needed something undeniable, something that connected her greed to her cruelty. The answer came the next morning, during a conversation with Helena, the therapist. She listened attentively as Henry, for the first time, shared all his suspicions, including the neighbor's information and the audio fragments. Helena pondered for a moment, her calm eyes fixed on a point beyond the window. Sometimes, to heal a wound, we have to go back to the place where it was created, she said, her voice firm. I'm proposing something that might seem bold, but it has a dual purpose. Therapeutic for Clara and Teodeta, perhaps revealing for you. The idea was a safe simulation in the pool area. An exercise in reframing the trauma, with lifeguards from the club, whom we can hire for a private session, and with temporary safety barriers, we can help Clara re-engage with the water in a completely controlled environment. The goal is for her to understand that she can be near the pool and still be safe. The second purpose was the key. And at the same time, Helena continued, we will observe Beatrice's spontaneous reactions. Controlling people often underestimate the power of observation. They feel safe on their stage until an unexpected spotlight reveals the makeup. Henry clung to the idea like a drowning man to a life raft. It was the perfect strategy, a high-risk investment with the potential for an incalculable emotional return. He spent the next 2 days on preparations. He hired 2 lifeguards from the club, informing them only that it was a therapeutic session to help his daughter overcome a fear of water. His IT team, briefed on the plan, worked in secret. Clara's tablet was equipped with new software and a tiny directional microphone disguised in its case, designed to capture specific sounds in noisy environments. On the other side of the house, in a makeshift control room, the technicians would monitor the signal, running tests on audio capture over the noise of wind and splashing water. With everything ready, Henry invited Beatrice to watch the exercise. Helena thinks it will be important for Clara to have our support, to see that we're in this together, he said, with the most sincere performance of his life. Beatrice accepted immediately, her eyes gleaming at the opportunity to solidify her image as a great caregiver. She envisioned herself consoling her stepdaughter, applauding her progress, the perfect stepmother helping to heal the child's wounds. What she didn't know was that the stage lights were about to be turned on her. On the appointed afternoon, the scene was set. The sun glinted off the water, the lifeguards were in position, and Clara, pale but determined, approached the edge in her chair, the tablet on her lap. Beatrice knelt beside her, her face inches from Clara's, a portrait of pure affection. You can do this, my love. I'm right here with you, she said, her voice loud. Then, believing she was out of earshot of anyone but the girl, she leaned in closer, and her voice changed, becoming a harsh, icy whisper. Don't you dare make a scene. Clara recoiled violently, a movement so sudden and genuine it was impossible to disguise. Across the pool, one of the lifeguards, trained to watch for any sign of distress, saw the gesture and the look of pure terror on the girl's face. He lifted his head and exchanged a meaningful, questioning glance with Henry. Beatrice's whisper, though inaudible to the others, echoed in Clara's soul like a thunderclap. The shrinking of her body was an instinctive response to a painfully familiar trigger. But this time, something was different. The look exchanged between the lifeguard and her father, a flash of silent communication, lit a spark of hope in the midst of her panic. Maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone in her perception of the truth. In the makeshift control room, the IT technician, an acoustics genius, who had previously helped Henry identify fraud in business teleconferences, frowned. "I got something," he said through the discreet earpiece in Henry's ear. "A low-frequency spike, very close to the mic. It's almost unintelligible, but it's there. I'm going to cross-reference it with the fragments we recovered from the other day." Thus began a meticulous work of digital archaeology, piecing together corrupted syllables, filtering out the wind, trying to give shape to a complete sentence. The therapy session continued, but the dynamic had shifted. The tension was palpable. Beatrice, noticing Henry's firmer gaze and the heightened attention of the lifeguards, felt the ground begin to crack beneath her feet. The certainty of her absolute control was evaporating. Paranoia, the constant companion of those who live a lie, began to set in. She needed to reinforce her defenses to ensure that no loose ends could bring down her house of cards. That same night, consumed by a growing anxiety, she made her most critical mistake. She picked up her phone and sent a text message to Jonas, the groundskeeper. "I know you care for the girl, but remember who signs your paycheck. Discretion is a well-rewarded virtue. The lack of it, not so much." It was a clear attempt at intimidation, a veiled order to maintain a code of silence. What Beatrice couldn't have known was that, a few weeks earlier, after a minor corporate security incident, Henry had mandated that all phones of key staff at the house and company, who had access to sensitive information about his assets and routine, be mirrored to the corporate security system. It was a measure to protect his assets, both financial and familial. Beatrice's message to Jonas appeared almost instantly on Henry's computer screen. The words glowed in the darkness of the office, cold and cruel. It was proof of coercion, a confession that there was something to hide. The discovery, however, brought a new and painful complication. The next morning, Jonas, his face downcast, showed the message to Henry, confirming his loyalty. But Clara, passing by the hallway, overheard a snippet of the conversation, her father's worried voice saying, "Threatened Jonas because of you." The girl's world collapsed in a new way. Guilt, a monster she hadn't known, washed over her. It wasn't enough to be afraid. Now she was the cause of danger for the people she cared about. The injustice born at the poolside was now spreading, contaminating the relationships she cherished most. That night, in her room, she cried softly, clutching her tablet. The will to fight, to see the truth prevail, began to wither, replaced by an overwhelming desire to give up. Why continue if her fight hurt others? This was the turning point, not just for Henry's investigation, but for Clara's emotional journey. The enemy was no longer just the fear of water or a stepmother's cruelty. It was the crushing weight of guilt. Guilt settled in Clara's heart like an anchor, pulling her into the depths of a silent sorrow. She withdrew even further, creating a cocoon of apathy from which neither Henry nor Helena could rescue her. The therapy sessions became monosyllabic, the colored pencils left untouched in their box. Henry felt his daughter's distance like an open wound. He had accumulated evidence, audio fragments, records of coercion and financial diversions that in the business world would be enough to dismantle a board of directors. But in the court of his own home, the rules were different. A legal victory would mean nothing if he lost his connection with Clara. Two enormous obstacles rose before him, as imposing as the skyscrapers that housed his offices. The first was technical and moral. How to prove the truth without re-victimizing his daughter, without forcing her to relive the trauma in excruciating detail. The second was strategic. How to break Beatrice's cycle of manipulation without giving her the slightest opening to claim she was the victim of a misunderstanding, a misunderstood wife. For Clara, the obstacles were equally monumental, but internal. The immediate challenge was finding the strength to continue the pool therapy, an act that now seemed to require superhuman courage. Every drop of water was a reminder not only of her fear, but of the pain her quest for justice was causing others. The bigger challenge, however, was deeper, to trust her father's word again. She had seen him smiling at Beatrice, sharing meals, keeping the peace. In her child's mind, Henry's performance was a betrayal. How could she believe he was on her side when his actions seemed to say otherwise? The mansion, with its modern architecture and manicured gardens, became a labyrinth of complex emotions. The scent of chamomile tea, which the housekeeper now prepared every night, permeated the air, a calming aroma in the midst of a silent war. In Clara's room, beside her bed, a small angel figurine seemed to watch the scene with impotent compassion. Henry, in his rare hours of solitude, whispered prayers he hadn't said since childhood, asking for clarity and strength. The tension mounted daily. Beatrice, sensing the shift in the environment but unable to pinpoint the source, redoubled her efforts at control. She rearranged the living room furniture, changed the flower arrangements, trying to impose a forced normality that only accentuated the strangeness. Her attempts to get closer to Clara were met with a glacial silence. During a Sunday lunch, with just the three of them at the table, she tried to make conversation about a new philanthropic investment fund she'd read about in a magazine, a clear attempt to redeem herself after the jewelry story. Henry responded with monosyllables, and Clara kept her eyes fixed on her plate. The ensuing silence was so thick that the clinking of silverware sounded like hammer blows. It was a battle of endurance, and Henry knew he needed one last element, the final piece that would transform his suspicions and circumstantial evidence into an undeniable truth. The answer was hidden in the circuits of a camera in a file everyone believed had been lost forever. The IT team worked against the clock, driven more by loyalty to Henry than by the generously paid overtime. The order was clear. Scour every byte of data stored locally on the security system's devices. The focus was on the garden camera, the silent witness to the event. Hope was minimal. The internet outage that had served as an alibi for Henry's early arrival was also the villain that had corrupted the files. They were trying to recover information from a hard drive, like an archaeologist trying to extract DNA from a fossil. The material was degraded, fragmented, almost useless. Henry followed their progress with the anxiety of someone waiting for the stock market to close after a day of catastrophic losses. Each negative report was a blow to his strategy, diminishing the net worth of his hope. While the technological battle raged, the emotional war continued in the mansion. Helena proposed a new approach with Clara. Instead of focusing on the pool, they began working with the idea of circles of trust. Using small dolls, Clara would set up scenes that represented her life. In the center of the circle, she placed the doll representing herself. Close to her were the dolls for her father and Jonas. Far away, almost off the rug, was the doll with blonde hair and a painted smile that represented Beatrice. One day, Helena introduced a new element, a small wooden chest. "This is the chest of secrets," she said. "Sometimes, when we hold on to a very heavy secret, it stops us from moving forward." Clara looked at the chest for a long time. Then, with trembling fingers, she picked up the Beatrice doll and placed it inside, closing the lid firmly. It was a small gesture, but it represented a huge breakthrough. She was beginning to compartmentalize the trauma, to understand it as something that could be contained, rather than a force that overwhelmed her. Beatrice, oblivious to these subtle advances, felt power slipping through her fingers. She tried a new tactic: nostalgia. She found an old photo album from when Clara's mother was still alive. She sat next to Henry on the sofa, flipping through the pages. "Look how happy you two were," she said, her voice soft, pointing to a photo of Henry and Clara in a park. "I just want that happiness to return. Maybe I'm trying too hard, smothering the girl with my care." It was a brilliant performance of self-criticism, an attempt to reposition herself as a victim of her own excessive love. Henry's stomach turned, but he kept his mask on. "We all want what's best for her, Beatrice," he replied, his voice neutral. It was then that his phone vibrated. It was the head of the IT team. The voice on the other end was restrained, but charged with an excitement he couldn't hide. "Mr. Harrison, I think we have something." The technician explained that while the main video file was unrecoverable, the camera, by a quirk of its operating system, had saved a temporary cache file to its internal memory. A tiny, low-resolution black-and-white file that hadn't been fully overwritten. "It's not much," the technician warned. "It's just a few seconds, and the audio is still a work in progress, combining it with the other fragments. But there's movement, a clear image of the chair accelerating, and the sound. We're getting close to isolating a phrase." Henry closed his eyes. The final piece. The image that, combined with the intimidating messages and financial diversions, formed an irrefutable sequence of intent and action. Justice, once a distant mirage, now seemed within his grasp. With the discovery of the video file, Henry felt the weight of the world begin to shift from his shoulders, but he knew the most delicate phase of his plan was just beginning. He had the proof, but the reveal had to be surgical, designed to protect Clara above all else. Helena's guidance was crucial. "The truth needs to set her free, not imprison her in a new trauma," the therapist said. "She needs to see that the support system around her is real and functional, that adults can, in fact, fix things." They decided to wait a few more days, so Clara would be emotionally stronger, buoyed by the sessions that were now progressing slowly but steadily. The chest of secrets remained closed, and the girl had started drawing again, now with brighter colors. The atmosphere in the mansion during these days of waiting was almost suffocating. It was the calm before the storm. Beatrice, sensing the shift in the power dynamic but unable to name it, alternated between a cloying sweetness and a contained irritability. She scrutinized the staff's work with unusual rigor, complaining about the seasoning of the food, the noise of the lawnmower. They were small explosions of an internal pressure she didn't know how to release. She tried to reconnect with Henry through shared interests, mentioning an investment opportunity in a tech startup a friend had suggested, talking about the need to diversify their portfolio beyond stocks and gold, perhaps exploring the crypto market. Henry listened, nodded, but his eyes were distant. He no longer saw the business partner, the sophisticated woman who accompanied him to dinners. He only saw the gears of a calculating mind in full operation. The support of Jonas and their neighbor, Mrs. Amelia, became a silent pillar for Henry. Jonas, now more observant than ever, reported small things, the way Beatrice spoke on the phone in a low voice when he approached, the visits from a messenger who wouldn't identify himself. Mrs. Amelia, for her part, made casual visits around snack time, bringing a lemon pound cake and 2 cups of tea. She would sit with Clara on the porch, far from the pool, and tell stories of her childhood in the countryside, of when she learned to swim in the river, of the fear she felt and the joy that came after. They were stories of overcoming, told without the intent to teach, but which planted seeds of courage in the fertile soil of Clara's imagination. The girl listened, fascinated, and for the first time in weeks, she asked a question. "Were you afraid of sinking?" "Every day, my dear," Amelia replied with a gentle smile. "But I wanted to get to the other side more." The IT team gave their final report on a Friday afternoon. "We got it. We cleaned the audio. We merged the fragment from the day of the incident with the whisper captured during the therapy session." The technician sent the audio file to Henry's phone. Alone in his office, his hands trembling, he pressed play. The phrase was short, clipped by the wind, but unmistakable. First, the harsh whisper from the therapy session, "Don't you dare." And then, the sibilant voice, recovered from the day of the fall, "Make a scene." The same phrase, split between two distinct moments, the proof of premeditation, of the pattern of verbal abuse that culminated in the physical act. Henry leaned back in his chair, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. The puzzle was complete. Now he just had to choose the time and place to turn the tables. The fourth week began under a sky so intensely blue it almost hurt to look at. The oak trees lining the streets of the community had burst into life, a vibrant and almost ironic contrast to the grey mood that dominated the mansion. Henry felt that every passing hour was another stone in the wall of lies he was about to demolish. He needed a controlled setting, a familiar environment that could, paradoxically, serve as the stage for the strangest of revelations. The idea came from an old memory, the movie nights he and Clara used to have, before Beatrice, before the distrust. It was a ritual, with popcorn popping on the stove, light blankets, and the choice of a film that always ended in laughter. It was the perfect setting, a retrieval of the past to justify the future. He announced the plan at breakfast. "How about a movie night tonight? Like old times?" Clara looked up from her tablet, surprised, and a flickering glimmer of interest appeared on her face. Beatrice, for her part, embraced the idea with enthusiasm. "How wonderful, darling. A family night. I'll prepare some special snacks." For her, it was confirmation that normalcy had returned, that her tactics had worked. She felt victorious, secure in her role. She spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing an elegant dress as if preparing for a social event, a theatre premiere. Her confidence had blinded her to the subtle signs, to the dense silence that had been accumulating in the corners of the house. While Beatrice was busy with her preparations, Henry made his own. He had a long, serious talk with Clara, explaining as gently as he could that tonight they were going to watch a different kind of movie. "A movie about the truth," he said, holding her hand. "You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. Just know that I am here and I believe in you, always." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness. They were tears of relief, the dissolution of weeks of doubt and loneliness. She trembled but nodded. "I want to see it," she whispered, her voice fragile but determined. "I want to see if the world will believe me." Henry also made a call to the head of security for the community, a man he trusted. The request was not for force, but for presence. "I need one of your men to be discreetly at my door at 8 o'clock sharp. He's not to intervene, just to ensure that the conversation we're about to have ends without incident, in a civilized manner." The request was unusual, but the word of Henry Harrison, one of the largest investors and property owners in the area, was an order. The stage was set. The popcorn began to pop in the kitchen, its buttery scent spreading through the house, a cruel parody of happiness. Henry adjusted the projector in the home theater, his heart hammering against his ribs. He, a man accustomed to billion-dollar negotiations, to deciding the future of companies with a single phone call, had never felt so nervous. This was not a negotiation of assets and liabilities. It was the reclamation of his family's soul. The home theater was bathed in shadow, lit only by the cool light emanating from the projector's blank screen. The smell of popcorn hung in the air, an almost ghostly presence from happier nights. Clara was positioned in a comfortable corner, a light blanket over her legs, her tablet discreetly beside her. Beatrice sat in a leather armchair, a glass of wine in her hand, the smile of anticipation still fixed on her face. Henry stood near the equipment, his palms sweating, his heart beating a syncopated rhythm that seemed to echo through the silent room. "Tonight's film is a short," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "An independent production. It's about memory." Beatrice laughed, a crystalline sound that shattered against the tension. "How profound, darling, you and your surprises." Henry pressed play. The first image that appeared on the screen was not a studio logo, but the familiar view of the backyard, filmed from a high angle. The sprawling oak, the deep blue pool, the orange-hued sky. The date and time appeared in the bottom corner of the screen. Beatrice's smile faltered, confusion beginning to cloud her features. The image was grainy, low resolution, almost black and white, but unmistakable. Then, the sound filled the room. It wasn't a score, but the raw audio, cleaned by the IT team, amplified so that every detail was audible. The sound of the wind in the leaves, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the harsh scrape of the wheelchair accelerating over the stone patio. The image on the screen showed the rapid movement, the blur of the chair approaching the edge. Then, the audio, crystal clear and cruel. Beatrice's voice, sibilant and cold, stripped of its sweet disguise. Make a scene." And immediately after, the sound of the splash, loud, violent, final. There were no screams on the recording, only the cold calculation, the command followed by the act. A heavy silence fell over the room, deeper and more oppressive than any darkness. The color drained from Beatrice's face, turning it into a plaster mask, terror and disbelief warring in her eyes. The wineglass slipped from her fingers and fell to the carpet with a dull thud. The red stain spreading like blood. She tried to stand, her mouth opening to utter a denial, an excuse, anything, but her escape was blocked. In the doorway of the theater, framed by the light from the hall, stood the community security guard. He said nothing, just stood there, the solid, impassible presence of silent authority. It was the end of the line. There was no more stage, no more audience to deceive. The play was over. It was then that Henry spoke, his voice no longer that of an actor, but that of a father, heavy with the weight of weeks of pain, doubt, and finally, certainty. His eyes, misty, met Clara's. "I believe you," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed you by doubting for a single second. Forgive me." He then turned to Beatrice, his gaze hardening, the sentence delivered not with hatred, but with the final clarity of one closing a failed business deal. "And as of right now, the rules of this house are changing." Beatrice's departure from the mansion was marked not by shouts or accusations, but by a cutting silence. As she gathered her belongings, under the discreet watch of the security guard, the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Henry made a conscious choice, guided by Helena and his own protective instincts. The ensuing battle would be fought in the courts, but in the civil, not criminal, arena. He wanted reparation and justice, but not at the cost of Clara's peace of mind. The idea of subjecting his daughter to long depositions, to cross-examinations that would force her to relive every detail, was unthinkable. He hired the best lawyers, men who specialized in complex litigation, whose task was clear: use the irrefutable evidence, the video, the audio, the financial records of capital diversion, and the messages of coercion to secure a settlement that would remove Beatrice from their lives forever, ensuring she answered for her actions without turning Clara's life into a judicial spectacle. It was an expensive solution, one that would consume a considerable portion of his liquid assets, but he saw it as the best investment in his daughter's mental health. The resolution, however, did not bring magical relief. With Beatrice's departure, a vacuum settled into the mansion. The echo in the hallways seemed louder, and the absence, even of a toxic presence, was strangely painful. For Clara, the house was steeped in memories, and the silence was a constant reminder of what had happened. She felt the house was empty, and that emptiness hurt. Henry realized that the real rebuilding was just beginning. He made a drastic decision for a man whose identity was so tied to his work. He completely rearranged his schedule. He delegated meetings, cancelled international trips, and began working from home most of the time. The board of his company, accustomed to an omnipresent CEO, had to adapt. He knew he was risking the profits of some deals, perhaps even losing opportunities to grow his fortune, but the asset he most needed to protect was now sitting across from him at the breakfast table, learning to trust again. Helena, the therapist, proposed a gradual, sensitive plan, aquatic rehabilitation, not in the home pool, still a trigger for bad memories, but at the country club. The same place that had once been a stage for social hypocrisy would now become a space for healing. The club, discreetly informed of the situation, offered its full support. The sessions would be with attentive lifeguards during off-peak hours. The first step was just sitting by the pool's edge, wearing a life vest, listening to soft music. Henry bought a small electric piano and set it up in the covered area, where he himself played old standards. The same ones Clara's mother had loved. The local culture that had once brought pain was now mobilizing to bring support. The subplots began to connect organically. Mrs. Amelia, the elderly neighbor, started attending some sessions, sitting in a nearby chair, telling her stories of overcoming, turning fear into a childhood anecdote. Jonas, the groundskeeper, who received a promotion and a significant raise, helped install new access ramps and automatic safety covers around the mansion's pool, a personal project of Henry's. Clara's school, informed of the situation, created an accessibility week, and the principal, very sensitively, invited Clara to say a few words. In front of her classmates, her voice still trembling but present, she spoke in public for the first time, not about the incident, but about fear and courage. The small victories in Clara's journey were won with effort and patience, each one a brick in the rebuilding of her confidence. The first attempt to cross the pool at the club, even with the life vest and the comforting presence of Henry playing piano nearby, was cut short by a panic attack that left her breathless. There was no frustration, only the therapist's calm voice saying, "That's okay. We got further than yesterday." That night, Clara cried for hours. A cathartic cry, as if purging all the accumulated fear. The second attempt days later was a success. She crossed the pool from end to end, her arms moving slowly, her face tense with concentration. When she reached the edge, there was no celebration, just exhaustion and more silent tears. Henry, instead of applauding, just held her hand and promised he would be there the next day, too. He was paying the price for his dedication. He lost a major contract in Argentina because he refused to travel, receiving veiled criticism from partners who didn't understand his sudden shift in priorities. To them, he was a billionaire acting erratically, risking business and profitability. To Henry, it was simply the cost of being a father. On the third crossing, something shifted. Clara went back and forth. Her movements were more fluid, her breathing more controlled. At the end, a small, almost imperceptible smile bloomed on her lips. It was the greatest reward Henry could receive, an emotional dividend of incalculable value. He understood that healing wasn't in one grand, cathartic event, but in the consistency of care, in the repetition of support, in the promise kept day after day. At the end of that fourth week, in the same backyard where injustice had begun with the smell of chlorine and lemons, a small, discreet ceremony took place. Without fanfare or guests, Henry inaugurated the Crossing Program, a community initiative for aquatic rehabilitation for children with reduced mobility, funded entirely by him and the club. The mansion's pool, now completely renovated, was the heart of the project. It had stainless steel handrails, a modern access lift, non-slip flooring, and an automatic safety cover that closed when it detected the absence of a responsible monitor. All the elements that had once been part of the drama, the tablet, the security, the IT team, the club, the therapist, the neighbors, the house's routines, had been reframed, transformed from tools of conflict into instruments of healing. To the distant sound of a soap opera playing in the club lounge, Clara entered the water, now wearing only the life vest, her body relaxed. Henry watched from a distance, his hands still trembling, not with fear, but with emotion. The therapist guided her with a calm voice, almost a whisper. The crossing was slow, her fingers wrinkling in the water, the scent of chlorine now mixed with the perfume of the night-blooming jasmine that blossomed in the garden. When she reached the opposite edge, there was no triumphant explosion. There was a dense, sacred silence, filled only by the sound of the water. The girl turned to her father and, without speeches, without words,